see what Chapter 3 brings us. On the road, Interstate 80 approaching the George Washington Bridge, Thursday, 16th of November 2006. How can there be so many people on one road? Sam tried not to laugh out loud at Dean's plaintive cry. The fifth time he had asked the question in the last 10 minutes, a time span during which the Impala had moved forward maybe 50 feet. They'd been driving all night. Sam had suggested they stop by a motel overnight, but Dean wanted to get there quickly. They had stopped in a motel in Clarion, Pennsylvania, to shower and change clothes, paying for it with one of the fraudulent cards, but didn't stay the night. Instead, they worked their way across Pennsylvania and New Jersey, taking it in turns to sleep or drive. Unfortunately, that meant they arrived at the approach to the George Washington Bridge, smack dab in the middle of the morning rush hour, and traffic was bumper to bumper. Dean was about ready to jump out of his skin. There's gotta be a faster way to get into the city. Sam didn't bother looking at the map, since they've had this conversation several times already. The Lincoln Tunnel and the Holland Tunnel are farther away from the Bronx, and their tunnels, they probably got more traffic because they have to squeeze more cars into fewer. Alright. They pounded the steering wheel. Ash's friend lived in a neighborhood called Riverdale, which was also in the Bronx, which meant it would be easier for Sam to investigate the Poe murders. That other thing you were talking about, Dean said. You said they were all from Eddie Albert Poe stories, right? Edgar Allan Poe. Yeah, right, whatever. He's the guy that did the Raven, right? Giving his brother a sidelong glance. Sometime you read a poem. They did it on The Simpsons once. Hey, come on, move it, will ya? Dean suddenly screamed at the car in front of them. Christ, you don't have to leave if the car lane between you and the guy in front of you. Again, he pointed the steering wheel. I swear these people got their driver's license from freaking Cracker Jack boxes. Anyhow, Sam said as much to take Dean's mind off his frustration as anything. The guy braked up in the basement is from the cask of Amontillado. The orangutan is from the murders on the real morgue, which, by the way, was the first detective story. Really? Yeah. That story was an influence on Sir Arthur Conan Doyle when he created Sherlock Holmes. Well, thank you. Marion, the librarian. Sam was glad to hear Dean teasing him, as it meant he was letting the driving get to him. Hey, use the freaking turn signal, will ya? Much. I took a lit class as an elective at Stanford. It was called American Hauntings, all about the use of supernatural in American fiction, including a lot about Poe. He shrugged. I was curious, after all the weird stuff we've seen, what the pop culture interpretations of what we do were like. What X-Files Returns didn't do the trick. Honestly, Dean, you should read Poe stories. So, Professor, what do you think the deal is with these murders? Faces of the Moon, recreating old short stories. Sound like any ritual you know. Not offhand, but there's something else. Before, when I had the maps out, I was checking something, and both these murders were exactly 1 mile from the Poe cottage. First of all, what's the Poe cottage? Poe lived in the Bronx for a few years in a little cottage. Dude, I've seen Fort Apache. The Bronx doesn't have cottages. Hey, jackass, pick a freaking lane. Sam suddenly felt the urge to get a firm grip on the dashboard with his good hat. It did in the 19th century. The Bronx didn't even become part of New York City until the 1890s or so. Anyhow, because Paul lived there, they preserved the cottage and his wife died there. Dean nodded. Okay, so the place has some emotional significance. Still, not connecting the dots, striking, Sam said. Me either. Second of all, why didn't you tell me this when you were playing with the maps? I thought you were trying to find alternate routes. Amazed Dean even had to ask, Sam said. You had led Zeppelin 2 in the tape deck. I know better than to try to hold an intelligent conversation with you when Whole Lot of Love is playing. Dean opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. They crawled ever more slowly toward the bridge, and Sam realized that they were approaching a toll booth. Dean saw that some lanes were moving faster, and he inched into them. Oh, dude, those are the easy pass lanes. Ah, crap. The bane of the Winchester's existence had been the proliferation of things like Easy Pass, Fast Lane, iPass, and assorted other services that involved sticking a piece of plastic on the windshield that a scanner would read, deducting the toll from a credit card or from payments made from a check. The former required a consistency of use with a card that Dean and Sam couldn't afford. Since their credit cards were all phony, Sam had considered setting something up with the checking account he'd had when he was at Stanford, and through which he maintained his cell phone and internet. But now, with he and Dean wanted by that law, it wasn't prudent for them to attach something to the car that could be used to trace their movements. However, the cash lanes were considerably slower, which Sam knew would only increase Dean's dark mood. Sure enough, the realization that he'd be stuck in slow traffic while dozens of other cars zipped through the easy path lane undid all of Sam's distraction work. And Dean was now holding the steering wheel with an iron grip in his right hand, while punching the inner side door with his left and muttering curses to himself. Recognizing a futile endeavor when he saw one, Sam pulled out his trio and made use of its web browser. He was slow, basically as fast as dial-up, but he was eventually able to find and call up the website of Ash's friend band Scott. So by the time he was done reading up on it, they were next in the toll line. Dude, Sam rolled around. Excuse me, I thought you were the keeper of the lucre. Mr. Pool Hustling Poker Player Man. Remember that girl in South Bend, the Notre Dame student who, under no circumstances, did Sam ever want to hear the end of any sentence of Dean's that began with words. Remember that girl? Fine, whatever. Sam tried to straighten his lanky form as best he could in the front seat, and dug his left hand into his pants pocket. He pulled out a ball of fluff, 3/4, several business cards that read Sam Winchester, reporter, that he'd made up in a print shop back in Indiana, and his monogrammed money clip, which had 4 bills in it, one of which stood out as being a $10 bill. Since they were all a different color now, he gingerly yanked it out and handed it to Dean. Dean paid the toll with the 10, waited for the change, then responded to the toll taker's request to have a nice day with an incoherent grunt, and then stuffed the 4 singles into his long shirt. Sam considered objecting, then decided that life was just too damn short, instead saying, "We wanna take the Henry Hudson Parkway, so stay in the right lane." Dean nodded as they started over the bridge. For a moment, Sam just took time to admire the view. The George Washington Bridge was one of the most famous bridges in the country, and while it didn't look quite as distinctive as, say, the Golden Gate, which he'd visited on a trip he and Jess had taken to San Francisco, or the Brooklyn Bridge right here in New York, it still had a certain grandeur that he admired. As Impala rolled over the bridge, still moving at less than 20 miles an hour, but that was an improvement on their pre-toll booth pace. Sam turned to his right. It was clear day out, so he could see the most famous skyline in the world. Skyscrapers in gray and red and silver and brown, all reaching upward, all different sizes and shapes, with the pinnacle of the Empire State Building rising above all of it. It was a complex melange of constructed life, a monument, the human achievement over nature. The scholar in him wanted desperately to explore the inner workings of that monument, whether to play tourist and see the sights, like he and Jess had done in San Francisco, or to check out the underside of the place, see if the thousands of legends that had grown up around the city were true. The alligators in the city's sewer system, the phantom subway conductor, the missile silos in East Side apartment buildings. He sat back in the passenger seat with a sense of melancholy. Their life didn't allow for that sort of thing. They came in, they did a job, they left. Hell, now Dean was on the Fed's radar, and while Sam couldn't find any specific warrant out for his own arrest, and didn't Dean love giving him crap about that, he was pretty sure he wouldn't be ignored if they got the attention of law enforcement either. They had to keep their heads down, which meant no self-indulgence. Seeing the Statue of Liberty, going to the top of the Empire State Building, exploring Central Park, even going underground is checked to see about the alligators and the ghost and the missiles. on the agenda. Them doing the job saved lives, which meant time spent not doing the job. People might die. Which meant time not spent doing the job meant people might die. That's the job, and it needs doing. One of the items on his 8-mile long list of regrets was that it took that time for him to realize that the exit for the Henry Hudson was right after the bridge ended. And to Dean's loudly expressed relief, most of the traffic that took the exit was going southbound, which would take them into Manhattan. Almost nobody else was going north. However, Dean's desire to speed was tempered by the parkway itself, which was hilly, twisty, and turning, and Sam found himself once again holding the dashboard in a death grip, feeling the need to distract himself from the fact that Dean was using the lane markers as a guideline more than a rule. Sam said, so I checked out this guy's band on the web. I'm starting to see why Alan thought of us. They're a cover band, and they do 70s rock. For the first time since the car started moving slowly on I-80, Dean's face brightened. Really? Yeah, they named themselves after a DJ who died a couple of years ago named Scott Mooney. Dude, Dean said in a familiar tone. It meant that Sam didn't know some arcane and pointless piece of musical lore that Dean thought was essential to being alive. Sam steeled himself for the T-Dot, even as Dean said. It's pronounced Mayoni, not money. They called him the Professor. He was one of the greatest rock DJs of the 60s and 70s. You know Van Morrison's Caravan, the Scotso. He's talking about this Moriani. Sam just nodded, despite not knowing the song or DJ in question, and not caring all that much. He had gotten enough of a tongue lashing on the subject of Robert Jordan's music during that hellhound job. Well, as friends, Sam said once he was sure Dean was done justicing him. Manfred of Fury is that lead singer and he plays guitar. There's 4 other guys, a keyboard player named Robbie Maldonado, another guitar player named Aldo Emanuele, a bass player named Eddie Grabowski, and a drummer named Tom Deity. They play weekends at a place in Larchmont called the Park in Rear. Dean shot a sidelong glance at Sam. Seriously, Sam shrugged. That's what the website says. The road finally straightened just in time for a sign indicating another toll. Oh, you have got to be freaking kidding me. Bad enough we had to pay $6 to get into this town. Now we gotta pay more. Raising his eyebrows at the use of we in that sentence, Sam pointedly said, you've got $4 in your pocket. Yeah. Dean pulled in behind several of the cars in the one and only lane labeled cash only, while other cars zipped through one of the 6 easy pass lanes. Sam was starting to think it was a conspiracy. Once they got through, went over another smaller bridge that welcomed them to the Bronx. Sam said, we want to get off at 246. Okay. The road continued to curve menacingly past several exits, most for streets numbered in the 200s before they reached the right exit. Within seconds, they were completely lost. drove up and down several hills and went on several roads that did not go straight and were frustrated by jumps in the numerical sequence of streets. The area was also surprisingly suburban looking, with some really big houses that had yards. Neither were images that Sam associated with being in New York City, especially after the view of crammed together skyscrapers he got from the GWP. I thought the city was on a grid, Dean said through clenched teeth. That's Manhattan, Dean, Sam said patiently. Great. The road angled down and to the right, nearing a T intersection. Sam caught sight of a green street sign that identified the upcoming street as East 20 to 48th. To 48th Street. There, he said, pointing. That's 248th. Turn right. I swear to God, Sammy, if it's not on this block, I'm turning around and going back to Indiana. Sam refrained from pointing out that, regardless of whether they were going to a fairy's house or back over the bridge, they were still lost. Besides, he got a look at one of the houses. The house numbers they passed were on the right block. There, that's his place. They weren't any parking spots on the street, but there was a driveway next to a fairy's place. So Dean parked the Impala there. Once the car came to a stop, Sam hopped out, grateful for the chance to stretch his long legs for the first time since they had gassed up in Scott Run, Pennsylvania. His knees popped that day strain. Nice, Dean said, and Sam had to agree. The house was a 3-story colonial with a stone chimney on the side, a wooden front porch, complete with porch swing and a dark wood front door with a small stained glass window. All Ellen had provided Dean was a name and address, as well as the name of the band that guy was in. So they had no way of knowing if he'd be home. A ring of the doorbell followed by a full minute of waiting indicated that he wasn't. Fine, let's break it, Dean said, reaching into his jacket pocket for his lockpicks. Sam put a hand on his arm before he could remove the paperclip in question. Let's not. We're supposed to be helping this guy, remember? We'll tell him Asher sent us. And if he doesn't believe us and calls the cops, Dean, we can't afford to commit felonies unless we absolutely have to. And we're not there yet. Hell, we just got here. Look, he probably has a day job. Let's check out the boat thing and come back in the evening when he's more likely to be home. Dean stared at Sam for a second, the way Dean's eyes were going back and forth. Sam could tell that his older brother was trying to figure out a way to be right and for Sam to be wrong, and was failing miserably. Finally, Dean turned around and went back to the car. Fine, but we ain't going nowhere until you figure out how to get us out of this nut house. He opened the driver's side door. Which crime scene you want to hit first? The house with the bricked up guy or the street where the monkey spanked back? Sam smiled. Neither. The orangutan that killed those 2 kids was from the Bronx Zoo. We should start there. Say we're with, I don't know, wildlife conservation was a subscriber that got a grin out of Sam. Casey was one of Dean's ex-girlfriends, given Casey's crusading character based on one and only time Sam met her in Missouri. He wasn't at all surprised that she supported the Wildlife Conservation Society. Sam pulled out the maps to figure out the best route to the zoo. While he did so, Dean asked, "Hey, does the Bronx Zoo have penguins like in Madagascar?" Without even looking up, Sam said that was the Central Park Zoo. I mean, the Bronx Zoo probably has them too. Yeah, but they're probably not as cool as the ones in Madagascar. I mean, I doubt they can over a rhino or do hand-to-hand